CSS specificity. Sometimes it can be a headache. Well, some people might argue that CSS in general sometimes can be a headache. But in today's video, I'm going to give you 3 tips for handling some CSS specificity headaches. So the first one that we're going to go over is try to avoid using the important selector and use lower weight specificity selectors when you can, as this is going to allow for a bit more maintainable and extensible CSS because it's going to allow you to more easily overwrite these selectors. Because if you use highly weighted specificity selectors, and if you don't know what I mean by highly weighted specificity selectors, make sure you check out my previous video to where I just discuss specificity in general and how that works. But using highly weighted specificity selectors is going to lead you to just needing to kind of use higher and higher specificity selectors in the future, which can lead you to kind of start using bad patterns like using the important selector and different things like that. So what might an example of this look like? Well, if you can get away with it for your specificity weightings, instead of using the selector that is #myelement, which is an ID selector, which is going to have a pretty high specificity weighting, you could use an attribute selector instead. And you could use ID equals myelement. So in this example here, and I am in a CSS file here, so this is working CSS code. Instead of using the ID selector, I use the attribute selector. And this is going to have a specificity weighting of 0-1-0. And this is going to be far less weight compared to using the ID selector. And both of these are going to be equivalent in terms of what they select. It's just going to be that this ID selector would have had the weighting of 1-0-0. Often, you can use a bit different selector to decrease the overall specificity weighting if you still can kind of get away with it and still have these styles apply like you want. That's probably a good approach to make your CSS a bit more maintainable and extensible in the future if you ever want to overwrite this. Now, another thing that you can do, tip number 2, is you can actually duplicate selectors rather than just immediately going for a highly weighted selector. Okay, so this right here is completely valid CSS. And what this is using 3 back-to-back chained class selectors. So this is saying select the element with the myClass class. So it's .myClass, but it's 3 times. So it's .myClass, .myClass, .myClass. And this is going to be equivalent to using 3 class selectors, which is going to add a higher specificity weighting. And it's going to have the weighting of 0-3 because there's 3 class selectors, -0. And this is still going to select elements that have the myClass class. And this can be a nice way to add a bit more specificity weighting without needing to immediately jump to something like an ID selector or using the important selector or something like that. All right. So you can kind of chain on these selectors here to increase your weighting without needing to kind of use a hammer to increase the weighting a bit more. And the third tip here is regarding where an element sits in the DOM tree. And more specifically, the proximity of an element to other elements that are referenced in a given selector has no impact on its specificity. Okay, so in this example here, I have this selector here, which is body space h1. So it's saying select an h1 tag that is within a body tag. And then I have this selector down here that is saying, okay, I want you to select an h1 tag within the HTML tag. And as you likely know, this HTML, that's going to be the root of our document. And this h1 tag is going to be further away in the DOM tree to this HTML tag compared to this body tag. But that has no impact on CSS weighting. The proximity of one element to another in the DOM tree has no relevance to specificity weighting. And this would still get applied to the element, because both of these would have the specificity of 0-0-2 because it's just two tag selectors. All right, so just keep in mind that tree proximity has no relevance to specificity and what styles get applied to an element. All right, so those are 3 tips for handling some specificity headaches. Stay tuned for future videos on CSS and writing better CSS, and I will see you in that next one.